Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Arway, for testimony today. A couple of questions, I guess, more or less to follow along the lines of stocking and other opportunities. I guess I have a couple of questions. First off, with the increases in the cost of the Fish and Boat Commission producing fish, and looking at that continue to increase, and the limited opportunities due to co-ops, what other alternatives other than raising the price of a license is the Fish and Boat Commission working with co-ops, or looking at legislation to allow for more co-ops? Or, I mean, because I don't think that we could, I believe that the reason we're selling less licenses now is because the price is too high. I know people that don't fish anymore because they just don't want to pay that extra money. So raising the cost will decrease the amount of money. What are the opportunities you see? How can we stock more fish at a lower cost?
And I agree with you on your last point about license increases discouraging people from fishing, and the data, the trends and the data bear that out. But in terms of trying to get more people to fish, one of the things we're doing is we're looking at some of the analysis around the country says that traditionally people would travel to go fishing. Today they don't travel as far to go fishing, so we have to get the fish closer to the people. So we're looking at adjusting stocking to get our trout closer to the people that use them, because we know where our high use areas are, especially for stock trout streams. The more people that fish, the more people that use those fish, the more money they spend. With the co-ops, I think, the co-ops, we would love to get more co-ops in the program. I don't think you can legislate it. It's based on public interest and, recruitment. We've got an internal work group of commissioners and staff right now that are looking at trying to increase the number of co-ops by 10%. I'm hopeful that we can do that. I'm not sure what incentives we can provide to do that. It all depends upon infrastructure, where you can locate a facility, whether you can grow, whether you got cold, clean water to be able to grow fish, and whether you got the cost.
And I know I'm going to go back to the co-op in my district, which due to the Class A, the Clean Stream Act. Now I propose legislation to exempt nurseries that were in operation for 20 years in certain class counties, but the Fish and Boat Commission doesn't support that legislation. That would allow for a lot of co-ops. Here you have people that want to do the co-ops. You have private clubs that are willing to help to pay for it and set it up and stock the fish, and they're being prohibited from doing it. And would the Fish and Boat Commission ever look at ways, I mean, in order to have a nursery, and these older nurseries were all set up, obviously on cold water streams, and now they're all being rated exceptional value. Do you have any intention or any plan to look at how can we get some of those co-ops those folks that want to have those co-ops in those nurseries that are not allowed to allow them to happen? I think the overall benefit for some of these streams and the stocking opportunities and the benefit to the anglers, and it far outweighs some of the discharge limits or some of the exemptions that we could put in for nurseries that have been grandfathered. Yeah, is that something that the Fish and Boat Commission would consider to look at?
Well, it's not really our call. DEP determines whether or not the siting of a facility would comply with the regulations to protect the stream. We support DEP since we're a conservation and recreation agency. So wherever we could site a co-op and make sure that the stream's not harmed, whatever the stream supports, whether it's a warm water stream or an exceptional value stream, we would support doing that. The question is, being able to do that in exceptional value streams is extremely difficult because you have to meet different standards for water quality protection. We saw that whenever DEP cracked the whip on us and we put in multi-million-dollar micro-screen filtration plants on our hatcheries because they were on high-quality streams. We publicly invested that money because we wanted to make sure that Spring Creek and Fishing Creek and the other streams, high-quality streams that our hatcheries were on, were protected. We'd hold the co-ops to the same standards, but the reality of it is they don't grow as many fish, so it's easier. They don't have to build a multi-million-dollar filtration plant. They may have to build a couple of settling ponds and do some extra monitoring. So we would support co-ops in sensitive watersheds, whether they're EV or HQ, as long as we can make sure that we protect the water quality of the stream that receives the discharge from the co-op.
Well, Well, and I think what we need to do is we really need to look at aggressively ways to make those opportunities work, because there are limited opportunities, especially if the streams were rated while that nursery was in operation. I think it's ridiculous that we now, that under the current laws and current guidelines, are not allowed to do that. And then I guess to follow up, and I'm going to keep going back to the stock, more and more folks that I talk to, a lot of people just aren't fishing anymore. As streams are rated Class A, it doesn't allow stocking for private clubs in those streams, and when you look at the declining sales and licenses, not everybody has the time to go out and buy a fly rod and go fly fishing and invest that much time and money. A lot of folks just want to be able to take their family to out in the first day or the first couple weeks of fishing, put a salmon egg or some power bait or a worm on the line and catch fish. And if we're not stocking fish, we're not doing that. Those opportunities aren't going to be there. And then if you take a 7 or 8 year old out to fish and they stand by the creek all day and don't catch anything, they're not going to buy a license when they're 15, 16 years old. They're just not going to fish. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have now. And I guess that goes back to maybe my concern of a culture at the Fish and Boat Commission. Has the Fish and Boat Commission done any studies, because I've done a little bit of reading on the interaction between wild trout and stock trout in streams, and there seems to be a culture at the Fish and Boat Commission to not want to introduce stock trout into wild trout streams. What is the interaction between stocked and wild trout, and why is the Fish and Boat Commission opposed to stocking wild trout streams?
Well, we've had a policy for quite some time. I don't remember when it was codified, that the commissioners passed, based back at the beginning of what we called Operation Future, which recognized that there is some interaction between stock trout and wild trout, and we made the conscious decision of saying that we weren't going to stock Class A wild trout streams. Those are the best of the best. They're less than 2% of all the 86,000 miles of streams we have in this Commonwealth, and we made the conscious decision to say, they support sufficient numbers of wild trout that we don't need to stock them. They're going to supply a recreational use, whether you choose to or not choose to fish for wild trout. But there's sufficient numbers of trout in those streams, they don't need to be stocked. However, there were a group of streams, as you know, that weren't listed as Class A's, so they could continue to be stocked. And we did that since for the last 10 or 15, 20 years. We still stock those groups. Well, we brought those groups out of that group of streams out of the closet, took another look at them and said, we're not going to shut the door on stocking those streams, because we know that we've created the public expectation that anglers want to fish for stock trout in those streams. So we said, going back to where do we get the most value out of our stock trout, we said any Class A streams that are in a high population density, we know we're going to get a lot of public use out of those stock trout. And the board is considering a position right now, this is a board's decision, not a staff decision, about how we're going to continue to stock those streams, yet still protect the wild trout that are in them, because they're Class A, they've always been Class A. And we've made the decision to go with pre-season stockings of rainbow trout on those Class A waters, a select group of Class A waters that we've been stocking all these years, but also we've decided we're going to designate them Class A. We're going to bring them out of the closet and we're going to designate them Class A, because along with that Class A designation gets those trout additional protection through the DEP Chapter 93 regulations. And we felt it was important that those trout that are in substantial numbers receive the same level of protection as all the other Class A streams that are around the state. So that's the position we've taken. That policy change is out for public comment now. I would encourage anyone in the room, if they would have ideas or thoughts about how we can adjust the policy to make sure that it's a conservation and a recreation policy, we welcome your thoughts and comments about it.
I definitely would support allowing those stocking opportunities. A lot of times, and they're done by private clubs. Now, also with that Class A designation, if a private club is going to be allowed to stock, it's my understanding that they will have to purchase those fish that they're stocking from a co-op, Fish Commission approved co-op. Is that accurate?
I don't know. I guess I'd turn to Dave Mico and.
So they could purchase those fish that they're stocking if they would be allowed from any nursery?
Dave's head's nodding yes.
Okay. And then back to, I guess my overall concern is the organization Trout Unlimited has a lot of influence on the Fish and Boat Commission at this time, and they have been, from my understanding, very vocal on stocking fish and wanting more Class A streams. How many members of the current Board of Commissioners are also members of Trout Unlimited?
Honestly, I don't know. I haven't polled the board to see who is a member and who's not a member. There's some active members at TU, but I'm not sure how many board members total there are that are members of TU.
Do you think that the influence that TU has over the Fish and Boat Commission is, do you think they have they're very influential and they have a lot of influence?
I would say, I don't think they have any more than the gas industry does on the other side of the extreme. I think TU's conservation mission lines up with our conservation mission in terms of the agency, but I think we have the additional recreation mission.
Do you think that the TU is more or less, I mean, I'm looking at the Fish and Boat Commission, and it's to also promote angling opportunities, where TU is more about their conservation and a particular type of angling opportunities, fishing for natural trout, and more or less the high-end fishing, the fly fishing operations, which is great. But you know, with the Fish and Boat Commission more being charged to provide angling opportunities, and TU being more of a say a fringe environmental group that's specific to one type of angling opportunity and conservation. Do you think there's a conflict that they would have that much influence over the Fish and Boat Commission?
I don't think so, because I don't think that's really what TU's all about. I'm a lifetime TU member. I have been since I was a kid, and I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania. There weren't any wild trout in southwestern Pennsylvania. I had a passion for protecting stock trout in cold water because of all the streams that were polluted by acid mine drainage. I grew up fishing for stock trout. Most of the TU members in TU are in those urban settings right now because that's where the people are, and they still fish for stock trout. So I think if you look at the majority, there are extremes within any organization, whether it's the legislature or Trout Unlimited, that advocate certain positions for the organization. I think in general, TU is about cold, clean water and making sure that we get good trout fishing opportunities, whether it's stock trout or wild trout. So I don't really see that kind of pressure from where I sit, at least, on the decisions we make. We listen to the extremes of TU, and we listen to the moderates in TU before we formulate a position that's going to be good for Pennsylvania anglers in general.
And that's my concern, is I'm looking for policies that are going to be best for the anglers and providing those opportunities and not necessarily concerned about special interest groups like TU. And now we have a lot of local clubs that have adopted a lot of streams throughout our area. We did have a lot of acid mine drainage in Carbon County, as a lot of parts of Pennsylvania did, and a lot of industrial sites that have been cleaned up, groups that have come out and raised their own money, bought fish, stocked, adopted streams, they cleaned up the streams, provided fishing opportunities, ran contests and derbies, and now they're more or less being shunned and pushed aside, and not really being, you know, those are the folks that adopted these, volunteered, didn't, you know, went out and cleaned these streams up, and now it seems like we're just pushing them aside and saying, hey, you guys really don't know what you're doing, we don't need you anymore, this is a Class A natural trout stream, and I think it's doing a disservice to those clubs. I think if you're looking to promote angling opportunity, you want people to get involved and put their time in, that I think the Fish and Boat Commission is really misguided and is being, and this is a comment, is being too heavily influenced by TU at this point. And if the underlying goal is to sell more licenses, to get more people fishing, then I believe you're heading in the wrong direction. And that's...
I appreciate the comments. Again, I encourage you and the groups you just talked about to weigh in on this public policy discussion, because right now it's before our Board of Commissioners, and we welcome comments from both sides on the issue. So please engage in that public policy discussion.
Thank you, Representative Heffley.